Hey, what's going on YouTube? Today I'm going to show you how to replace the front brake pads and rotors on a 2013 Volkswagen Passat SE. I'm going to show you all the tools you need, and I'm going to walk through it step by step so you can do the job yourself. So the first thing you want to do is engage the parking brake to prevent the vehicle from moving forward once you lift the front end up. Next, take a pair of pliers or some vice grips and pull off these plastic caps that protect the lug nuts. Now take your tire iron or a breaker bar with a 17mm socket and go ahead and just crack these lug nuts. You don't want to remove them, you just want to crack them while the wheel's on the ground, because once you lift it up it's going to be almost impossible to crack it without an impact gun. Next, locate this triangular dimple just behind the wheel. That is going to point you to where your jacking point is. It's this reinforced piece of metal that sticks down. You can use the factory jack that came with the vehicle or another bottle jack or floor jack to get it up. I like to use both just for extra safety. Then we'll take our 17mm socket and we'll go ahead and remove those lug nuts once that wheel's off the ground. I like to place a jack stand just underneath of the lower control arm just for extra safety as well. Now take your flathead screwdriver and pop off this retaining clip on the caliper. Once you get that off, look at the back of the caliper for these two plastic caps. They cover up the caliper bolts. You should be able to get them off by hand, but you might need a flathead screwdriver if they're being stubborn. Now take a 7mm Allen or hex head, or you can also use a 45mm Torx bit, and remove those caliper bolts that we just took those caps off of. Because they're seated in a rubber grommet, they can be difficult to get them out enough to get the caliper off. You can try to push by hand or take a screwdriver or a pair of pliers and kind of pull at it. You might have to play around with it. You don't need to actually remove them fully. You can just pull them back far enough to be able to get the caliper off. Once you get those bolts off, go ahead and try to pull the caliper off. If it doesn't want to come off easily, you may need to take a screwdriver and pry against the brake pad to push the piston back in to give it enough room to come off. And once you pull it off, go ahead and pull off the outer pad. It may still be seated in the caliper bracket. Mine actually stuck to the caliper, so I just pulled it off of there. And before you remove the inner pad, go ahead and push against it to try to push back the piston all the way back into its seat. You need to get it all the way back in there to get the new brake pads in to be able to clear the new rotor when you put it on. If you can't push it by hand, try and use a C-clamp to push it back in. Just put it on the front of the pad and one end on the back of the caliper and tighten it until that seats all the way back. You leave the brake pad on to give you more surface area and more room to push against. Here you can see where I pushed the piston all the way back into its seat. Once you get that done, go ahead and pop off the inner brake pad. Now take your 21mm socket and a breaker bar or a ratchet and remove the caliper bracket bolts. And once you get both of those bolts removed, you can go ahead and pull off that caliper bracket. And we can see here how much rust and dirt buildup is on the inner side of the caliper bracket. So we're going to want to take our wire brush and remove a lot of that rust buildup and dirt buildup so that we put our new brake pads in, they can slide easily and don't get caught on any of the rust here. Once we get it nice and cleaned off, take a T30 Torx bit and remove this rotor retaining screw. And here comes the hard part if you haven't done a rotor in a while on your vehicle. It may take a lot of time. It took me about 15 minutes of hitting with a mallet and a hammer and trying to move it by hand. But while you're doing this, you do want to make sure that your caliper is secured. That way when you're hitting it, it doesn't fall off and tug at the brake line or put extra tension on that brake line, because it is a rubber hose. We don't want to be pulling on that. So when you put the new rotor on, you want to look for this small hole. That's where your retaining screw goes through, and you want to line it up with the small hole on the hub so you can get that retaining screw in. Once we get our new rotor installed, we'll take our caliper bracket and we'll reinstall that. Just slide it over top of the new rotor and take those 21mm bolts and reinstall those. You do want to make sure that these caliper bolts are tightened down pretty good. I like to take my long ratchet and give it a good push. Now we'll get our new brake pads installed. We'll start with the inner one, and we'll take some brake grease or brake lubricant and put them on the slides on the side of the brake pad. That just helps to reduce noise and friction and make the pad slide better. And we'll go ahead and pop it into the piston. And you want to make sure to be careful not to get any of that brake grease or brake lubricant on the brake pad surface, as it will reduce the braking ability. And we'll do the same thing for the outer pad. We'll get some of that brake lubricant on the slides on the side, and we'll also put some on the back because the caliper does touch the back of the pad there with those two arms. So we'll put that on there to help, again, reduce some noise and reduce friction. Once we get our lubricant on, we'll go ahead and seat the outer pad into the caliper bracket there, not onto the caliper like the inner pad, but onto that caliper bracket. And then we will take our caliper with the inner pad installed and we'll slide it over top of the new pad and the new rotor and get it tightened back into that brake caliper. And this is where it's really important to make sure that you do that first step of pushing the piston back in, because if you don't, you won't be able to get this caliper with the new pads on. The new pads are obviously a lot thicker, they have more meat on them, and the rotor is going to be a little bit thicker. And so if you don't push that piston back, this will not go on properly. You have to take them off and try to push it back in after the fact, and it just turns into a mess. So once you get that on, go ahead and take your bolts and get those reinstalled. Once you get those caliper bolts back in, put those plastic caps back on. Then we're going to get our retaining clip back on. I find it easiest to get the bottom portion on first, and then with the top portion, start with the end that goes into the hole. Take a pair of pliers and pull back on the top portion to get it behind the caliper bracket. And now we're all done, so we'll go ahead and put our wheel back on, and we'll tighten on our lug nuts while it's still in the air. And then we'll go ahead and lower it down so the tire touches the ground so we can tighten them fully. We want to do it in a star pattern like I'm doing here, so we don't get one side tighter than the other. We want to make sure we get an even distribution of the lug nuts and the wheel sits on perfectly flat. All right, thanks for watching, everybody. Hopefully you can follow this video and do the job yourself and save a little bit of money. Make sure to like and subscribe for more videos.